Che media is it?
Geweldig. Ja, van gewoon niet bestaan. es hat regnet. Das ist normal.
Thank you.
Diplomats, students, scholars, NGOs. No.
Just that it wasn't just
Last shots, please.
Yeah. The sitting is open. The court meets this morning to hear the single round of oral argument of the State of Israel on the request submitted by the Republic of South Africa on May 10, 2024 for the indication of additional provisional measures and the modification of previous provisional measures in the case concerning application of the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide in the Gaza Strip, South Africa versus Israel. I now give the floor to the co-agent of Israel, Mr. Ghilam Noam. You have the floor, sir.
Mr. President, members of the court, it is an honor to appear before you once again on behalf of the State of Israel. This case, even by its very name, the application of the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide in the Gaza Strip, suggests an inversion of reality. It has given rise to South Africa's egregious and repeated efforts to bring Israel before this court through the obscene exploitation of the most sacred convention. South Africa presents the court yet again, for the fourth time within the scope of less than 5 months, with a picture that is completely divorced from the facts and circumstances. Israel is engaged in a difficult and tragic armed conflict. South Africa ignores this factual context, which is essential in order to comprehend the situation, and also ignores the applicable legal framework of international humanitarian law. It makes a mockery of the heinous charge of genocide. As Israel has previously stated before this court, when dealing with the law, facts matter. Truth should matter. Words must retain their meaning. Calling something a genocide again and again does not make it genocide. Repeating a lie does not make it true. Here in the Peace Palace, it cannot be otherwise. Mr. President, Israel received notification of this hearing on Monday, less than 4 days ago, while it was observing a particularly painful National Remembrance Day. This notification came as a great surprise, because the court had already invited Israel to submit its observations on South Africa's request in writing by Wednesday of this week. Israel was preparing its written observations when the court suddenly announced that it would hold an oral hearing instead. In seeking to accommodate the court's decision, Israel immediately reached out to its legal team so as to guarantee that it could properly be represented by counsel. That proved impossible, as Israel's lead counsel is shipborn this week, and other counsel were likewise unable to come to The Hague on such short notice. For this reason, Israel wrote to the court in good faith, asking that the hearing be rescheduled to next week. It explained that the dates fixed by the court significantly impacted Israel's ability to be sufficiently well represented and the fundamental principle of equality of arms. Israel's request was rejected. The date of this hearing remained that which South Africa had expressly requested. The regrettable result is that Israel is not represented today by its chosen team of counsel and advocates. The equality of the parties and the administration of justice have been severely undermined. Out of respect for this court, the same respect that Israel has shown through all these past several months, Israel's co-agents have nonetheless traveled to appear at this hearing. South Africa's complaint yesterday that Israel has failed to respond to its current request is therefore wholly unfounded. Israel expects that the court will appreciate the predicament that Israel has been placed in. This is all the more so given that South Africa yesterday quite radically changed the terms of its requested provisional measures, which Israel has been given less than 24 hours to respond to. Mr. President, members of the court, bearing all that in mind, allow me to recall 4 basic facts that South Africa continues to conceal. It is highly regrettable, to say the least, that these basic facts must once again be stated in this great hall. First, Israel is engaged in a war it did not want and did not start. It is under attack and fighting to defend itself and its citizens. Since the horrific onslaught that began on 7 October 2023, which saw thousands of Israeli citizens brutally slaughtered, mutilated, raped, and injured, and 254 women, men, and children taken hostage into Gaza, Hamas and other terrorist organizations in Gaza continue to attack Israel, including by indiscriminate rocket fire into Israeli cities and towns. They have vowed to try and repeat the atrocities of 7 October many times over. Since the beginning of the hostilities, more than 10,000 rockets have been fired from the Gaza Strip towards Israel, with the aim of killing as many Israelis as possible. The last 2 weeks alone saw 278 rockets launched. Damage of an unprecedented scale has been caused to Israeli civilian homes and infrastructure, with entire communities destroyed. Approximately 60,000 residents of towns in southern Israel remain displaced from their homes 7 months on. It may be years before they are able to return to their homes and rebuild their communities. Sirens continue to go off across the country as rockets, missiles, and drones are launched against Israel from several fronts. Rafah, in particular, is a focal point for ongoing terrorist activity. It is a stronghold for Hamas's operatives, with several battalions belonging to the Rafah brigades entrenched in the area. Also present in Rafah is an intricate underground tunnel infrastructure that runs underneath the city and provides ample space for operatives, command and control rooms, and military equipment. Nearly 700 tunnel shafts have been identified in Rafah, from which approximately 50 tunnels cross into Egypt. These tunnels are used by Hamas to supply itself with weapons and ammunition. It could potentially be used to smuggle out of Gaza hostages or Hamas senior operatives. Since the start of the present hostilities, more than 1,400 rockets were fired from Rafah alone, including more than 120 in the last 2 weeks. Approximately 600 launch sites were identified in the Rafah area, many of which hidden within or in close proximity to civilian infrastructure. Information regarding rocket launches from Rafah during the current conflict can be found in tab 1 of your judges folder. Israeli hostages are also being held in Rafah by their captors. In fact, Israeli forces managed to rescue 2 Israeli hostages from Rafah on 11 February 2024. I recall that South Africa filed a request with this court the next day for provisional measures that would prevent Israel from taking military action in Rafah, and this request was rightfully denied. South Africa purports to describe Rafah as a last refuge for civilians in Gaza. While many civilians have indeed evacuated to Rafah over the past few months, the fact remains that the city of Rafah also serves as a military stronghold for Hamas, which continues to pose a significant threat to the state of Israel and its citizens. In tab 2 of your folders, you can find a map showing locations of rocket sites, tunnel shafts, and command and control sites embedded in the civilian population in Rafah. South Africa warns this court that, I quote, "If Rafah falls, so too does Gaza." Once again, however, the reality is exactly the opposite. Only by bringing down Hamas's military stronghold in Rafah will Palestinians be liberated from the clenched grip of a murderous terrorist regime, and the road to peace and prosperity may finally be paved. The reality is that any state put in Israel's difficult position would do the same. The right of defense against the brutality of the Hamas terrorist organization cannot be in doubt. It is an inherent right afforded to Israel as it is to any state. Israel is committed, as it must be, to realizing this right in accordance with the law, which is why it has worked diligently to enable the protection of civilians even as Hamas seeks deliberately to endanger them. To deny Israel this basic right would be to suggest, shockingly, that the most fundamental right afforded to all states should be withheld from one. This is an unthinkable outcome that would tell Israeli citizens and the hostages that they are not deserving of protection, of life itself, and tells the Israeli state that it will be treated unequally in a manner that is at odds with the most basic of legal principles. Israel is acutely aware of the large number of civilians that are concentrated in Rafah. It is also acutely aware of Hamas's efforts to use these civilians as a shield. That is why its battalions are present there. That is why its rockets are there. That is why hostages are there. We do not wish harm to these civilians, as Hamas does. That is precisely why Israel is taking steps to try and contend with the massive complexity that such a situation presents. That is why there has not been a large-scale assault on Rafah, but rather specific, limited and localized operations prefaced with evacuation efforts and support for humanitarian activities. Does Israel face complex operational challenges in Gaza? Certainly. But can we imagine a situation where a state does not take military action to protect its civilians when they are under fire? And can we imagine a court of law telling a state that the law prevents it from defending itself from attack? This is simply untenable. When I last stood at this podium in January, Israeli hostages had been in captivity for almost 100 days. At the time, this seemed inconceivable. Yet the hostages have now been in captivity for over 7 months. More than 130 children, women and men, including the sick and elderly, have now been held in Gaza for 224 days, incommunicado and in inhumane conditions. Among them is 23-year-old Hirsch Goldberg-Polin. Hirsch was abducted from the Nova Music Festival in Re'im, severely injured. On 25 April 2024, Hamas released a video of Hirsch. In it, he is seen with an amputated arm, which was blown off by Hamas terrorists. He is alive. He needs medical treatment. At least 36 of those who were taken hostage on October 7 have been confirmed dead, and their bodies are still held in the Gaza Strip. Among them are Yossi Sharabi, a 53-year-old father of 3, and Itai Svirsky, who is 38-year-old. Both of them were kidnapped from their homes in Be'eri. On 14 January 2024, in a display of pure and unadulterated cruelty, Hamas made public a video of the two and of a third hostage, 26-year-old Noah Argamani, who was also kidnapped from the music festival, promising to announce on the following day which of the 3 are alive. Shortly thereafter, it was confirmed that Yossi and Itai had both been killed after 102 days in brutal captivity. Additional information regarding hostages still held by Hamas can be found at tab 3 of your Judges folder. It remains unclear how many more innocent victims have been killed at the hands of Hamas. Simply put, this situation is unconscionable. It is unbearable for the parents who videos of their young daughters, bruised and bleeding, paraded before cheering crowds in Gaza. And we have heard harrowing accounts told by survivors released from Gaza of the torture and sexual violence they suffered at the hand of their captors. And it is intolerable for a nation obligated to defend its citizens and wishing for their return. This court has called for the immediate release of the hostages, but to no avail. It is Israel's right and obligation to defend them and all its citizens from the evil that was unleashed on them on 7th October and since then. Any state would do the same. Mr. President, members of the court, I next turn to the second fact that must be kept in mind. Hamas, with whom Israel is engaging in this armed conflict, is not a party to these proceedings. Israel is engaged in an intense armed conflict with a ruthless jihadist terrorist organization, one that is not only targeting Israeli civilians, but is also using Palestinian civilians to shield itself, in utter disregard for their lives or for the law. By exploiting the Genocide Convention, South Africa is suggesting a convoluted reading of international law, under which any armed conflict could be brought before the court. It seeks, once again, to obtain provisional measures that would bind only Israel and not its adversary. The absurd result would be that Israel would be denied its inherent right to defend itself. Hamas, for its part, would remain free to continue committing its horrific crimes. The purpose of the Genocide Convention is not to have the court supervise the conduct of armed hostilities by parties to the conflict, by the assertion of the genocide. Rather, the Convention, and subsequently this court's jurisdiction, is limited to the grave crime of genocide. I am compelled to restate once again that there is a tragic war going on, but there is no genocide. Yet, particularly at the provisional measure stage, when the evidentiary threshold is such that the applicant is not required to provide proof of its allegations or the existence of specific intent to commit genocide, there is a danger that the court will find itself engaged in the micromanagement of operational aspects of an armed conflict. This is what South Africa has been asking the court to do. Judge ad hoc Barak warned precisely of this danger when the court handed out its decision on South Africa's third request for provisional measures. He observed that, I quote, "The court has accepted South Africa's invitation to become the micromanager of an armed conflict and used the Genocide Convention as an excuse to rule on the basis of international humanitarian law. Managing an armed conflict under the Genocide Convention is a dangerous endeavor, especially when one of the belligerents is not a party to the Convention. This remains true when considering South Africa's fourth request." Mr. President, members of the court, this brings me to third basic fact that must not be ignored. South Africa purports to come before you, yet again, as a guardian of humanity. In fact, it has a clear ulterior motive when it asks you to order Israel to stay away from Rafah and to withdraw all its troops from Gaza. It does so in order to obtain military advantage for its ally, Hamas, which it does not wish to see defeated. It is this reason that South Africa continues to abuse the Genocide Convention, this court, and the procedure of provisional measures. Just 6 days ago, on 11 May 2024, only a day after it submitted the present request for additional provisional measures, South Africa hosted a Hamas delegation in Johannesburg. South Africa's foreign minister herself met with Hamas representatives. They did not use the meeting to urge Hamas to release the hostages, to stop targeting Israeli civilians, to cease using human shields, to cease operating from within and nearby hospitals, UN facilities, and other protected sites. They apparently met to discuss their continued campaign against Israel in the court and on the ground. Mr. President, members of the court, South Africa is not interested in the truth, nor is it interested in law or justice. Once again, it is exploiting the court and its authority to issue provisional measures. It is in no rush to reach the merits of this case when it will have to substantiate its baseless claims with evidence that simply does not exist. Israel, for its part, has shown nothing but respect for the judicial process and for the law more generally. As the court will recall, on 28 April 2024, Israel provided the court with a lengthy report detailing inter alia the numerous steps that Israel had actively and effectively taken to address the humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip, consistent with the court's previous orders. Rather than first responding to Israel's report, South Africa rushed to submit yet another request for provisional measures, its fourth, for fear that Hamas's last significant stronghold will fall. Hamas itself has repeatedly rejected every offer for a ceasefire. On 25 April 2024, 18 states called upon Hamas to release immediately the hostages still being held in Gaza. They said, and I quote, "We emphasize that the deal on the table to release the hostages would bring an immediate and prolonged ceasefire in Gaza that would facilitate a surge of additional necessary humanitarian assistance to be delivered throughout Gaza and lead to the credible end of hostilities." 4 days ago, on 13 May 2024, the United States National Security Advisor noted in the same vein that, and I quote, "There could be a ceasefire tomorrow if Hamas simply released women, wounded, and elderly hostages." Israel put a forward-leaning proposal on the table. The world should be calling on Hamas to come back to the table and accept a deal. South Africa spoke yesterday about rebuilding a viable Palestinian society. Yet, South Africa's actions speak louder than its words. By its actions, it is clear that South Africa wishes to see Hamas remain in control of the Palestinians in Gaza and to destine them to misery. It is Israel that wishes to see a different future to Gaza, one in which Palestinians and Israelis can both live in peace. Hamas, the genocidal terrorist organization, will stop at nothing to prevent that. Mr. President, members of the court, this brings me to the fourth fact that the court must not lose sight of. As is the case with all armed conflicts, incidents involving alleged violations of the rules regulating the conduct of hostilities may occur. This reality is not unique to Israel. No state is infallible. Israel's independent and robust legal system addresses all allegations of misconduct, including in the current hostilities. They must not be thrown before this court in the form of facts and conclusions, and as evidence of something they are not. Armed conflict is not a synonym for genocide. South Africa mentions some individual incidents reported in the media and attempts to present them as evidence of unlawful policies. Yet, Exceptional incidents are just that, exceptional. They do not evidence a policy of illegal behavior, let alone a policy of genocide. And then also cannot be cited as fact until a proper examination is carried out. Not every media report reflects facts or incidents correctly or in their full context. Israel has been and remains committed to acting in accordance with its international legal obligations, including those under international humanitarian law and the Genocide Convention. Israel has in place the necessary mechanisms to examine and investigate allegations of wrongdoing by its military forces and to ensure accountability for violations of the law. Information about these mechanisms and their activities since the commencement of hostilities has been provided by Israel in both the report of 26 February 2024 and the report of 28 April 2024. It bears repeating before the court today that since the beginning of the hostilities, 55 criminal investigations have been opened by the military advocate general with respect to incidents that raise prima facie reasonable suspicion of criminal misconduct. In addition, the fact-finding and assessment mechanism, a permanent, independent and professional mechanism in charge of examining exceptional incidents, is in the process of addressing hundreds of incidents from the current conflict. With respect to various public statements, as I stressed in January before the court, the Israeli legal system knows how to draw a line between statements that are troubling and even obscene, but still fall within the right of freedom of speech in a democratic society, and those statements which go beyond that right. Israel's reports have also outlined the steps taken by Israel's law enforcement agencies to examine dozens of statements made in the context of the current hostilities in order to ascertain whether legal steps are warranted. It was recently decided that some cases justify the promotion of criminal proceedings. At the same time, since the outset of these proceedings, South Africa has consistently cherry-picked statements or taken others out of context in an attempt to attribute to Israel the intent to commit genocide, taking advantage of the low evidentiary threshold at the provisional measure stage. It does so in the present request as well, attributing to Israel alleged genocidal aims and acts based on statements clearly calling for victory over Hamas and for its destruction. Israel has made repeatedly clear that the policy and instructions for conducting the hostilities stem from the decisions of the Ministerial Committee on National Security Affairs and the War Cabinet, and not from various social media accounts or interviews. As Ms. Kaplan-Turgeman will explain, the decision of the Israeli cabinet and their implementation on the ground leave no doubt that South Africa's allegations regarding genocide are completely and utterly baseless. Israel's law enforcement authorities also act to counter Israeli protesters who block the transfer of aid from Israel to Gaza. The Israeli police secures coordinated convoys during their passage in Israel. With respect to the incident of May 13, during which protesters caused damage to aid trucks, the Israeli police is prioritizing the investigation, which was assigned to a special investigation unit and has already resulted in the investigation of several suspects and witnesses. The authorities are acting in this regard and will continue to act in order to investigate and prosecute, if appropriate, and to ensure the continued effective and efficient transfer of humanitarian aid. As part of a lessons learned process, an improved mechanism was adopted by the police and the IDF to ensure the safety of the convoys. Finally, even during hostilities, the door of Israel's High Court of Justice, a central pillar of Israel's robust and independent legal system, are open to those who seek to challenge the actions of Israel's government. This includes non-governmental organizations, NGOs, and individuals who are not Israeli citizens and residents, if they are potentially affected by such actions. In fact, Israel's High Court of Justice is currently reviewing a petition submitted by a number of Israeli NGOs concerning the humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip. The court is reviewing the compliance of the Israeli government's policy with both international humanitarian law and Israeli law. In its response to the petition, the state has submitted extensive briefs and has participated in 2 public oral hearings before a senior 3-judge panel. It has presented in detail the effort it is undertaking to alleviate the humanitarian situation. An additional statement will be submitted to the court within the next few days concerning, inter alia, the operation in Rafah. As I stated before this court in January 2024, even when the cannons war in Gaza, the law is not silent. Israel's legal system and its domestic mechanisms are a testament to this. Mr. President, members of the court, let me now say something about the weakness of South Africa's allegations. Its counsel berated Israel yesterday for casting aspersions at what it called credible information provided by South Africa. But the sad truth is that South Africa cites hateful social media accounts and unsubstantiated news reports in support of its claims. Surely this cannot pass. An additional flaw in this regard is South Africa's heavy reliance on documents prepared by third parties or under the auspices of the United Nations, when these cannot be said to constitute sufficient evidence of a reliable quality. Indeed, the court has itself had occasion to observe that UN reports may only be of such quality, I quote, to the extent that they are of probative value and are corroborated, if necessary, by other credible sources. The court moreover stated that, and I quote, the precise evidentiary value accorded to any report, including those produced by United Nations entities, also depends on the methodology and amount of research underlying its preparation. It is important to clarify. Israel does not underestimate the reports of the UN and other sources. We study them, draw conclusions and lessons in the appropriate cases. However, statements from such reports should not be accepted automatically, especially in a complex combat reality. These words of caution are of particular significance in the present case, as the materials cited by South Africa have been prepared without access to relevant and necessary information, including that held by Israel, and often without any attempt to access such information. They frequently rely on Hamas sources or on those subject to Hamas intimidation. One striking example, which gives serious cause for alarm, is that even UN OCHA, which has so far parroted information generated by Hamas-run agencies in Gaza regarding fatalities, has recently started to accept that the information coming out of Gaza is flawed. It highlighted that more than 10,000 of the fatalities declared by Hamas are unnamed and thus unverifiable. Concurrently, it revised dramatically the number of verifiable fatalities of women and children fatalities to approximately half than was previously presented, and stop parroting the baseless claim that 70% of the casualties are women and children. It turns out that the data that the UN were using and that South Africa has presented to this court as true was wrong. While the number of overall fatalities has not changed, the breakdown is crucial. Hamas has been concealing the number of militants in its unverified lists of Palestinian casualties. Hamas's lists also contain persons who died from reasons unrelated to IDF actions, such as fire of terrorist organizations, and show many irregularities in reported age, gender, and ID numbers. In this way, an armed conflict can easily be portrayed as genocide. As we have stated, every civilian death is a tragedy. Moreover, overall fatality counts during a war are not, in and of themselves, evidence of unlawful conduct under international law. Once again, the facts matter. South Africa has not missed an opportunity to make outlandish accusations against Israel, and its fourth request for provisional measures is replete with blatant distortions and misrepresentations. We heard plenty such outrageous distortions and misrepresentations yesterday as well. Perhaps most repugnant is South Africa's suggestion that Israel has created zones of extermination, evoking terminology reminiscent of the systematic extermination of European Jews during the Holocaust. Similarly outrageous is South Africa's cynical attempt to equate Israel's action with the genocidal practices at Srebrenica. How low South Africa has stooped. These allegations leveled at Israel are patently untrue and emphatically denied. Like many of the claims in South Africa's application and requests, they lack any basis in fact or law. South Africa claims that Israel has closed critical border crossings into Gaza, when this is blatantly untrue. It has claimed that Israel has failed to facilitate the provision of fuel for sustaining humanitarian operations and facilities. This is also untrue. Ms. Kaplan-Turgeman will further elaborate on these points in a moment, as well as on the continuous efforts that Israel has been making to alleviate the humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip. As Counsel for Israel noted before the court during the oral hearing on 12 January 2024, a state intent on committing genocide would not undertake the operational and humanitarian efforts that Israel has taken and is taking to mitigate civilian harm. It would not have delayed a ground maneuver for weeks, urging civilians to seek safer space and, in doing so, sacrifice operational advantage. It would not invest massive resources in facilitating humanitarian aid. If anybody should be told that enough is enough, it is truly South Africa and not Israel. At what point do we say enough to South Africa's repeated attempts to exploit the provisional measure procedure of this court in such a vile and cynical manner? This war, like all wars, is tragic and terrible for Israelis and Palestinians, and it has exacted a terrible human price. But it is not genocide. I can only recall once again that Israel has made it clear that if the hostages were released and Hamas were to lay down its arms, the hostilities would cease, and has been engaged intensively in negotiations to that effect. Mr. President, members of the court, South Africa asked this court to order Israel, and I quote, cease its military operations in the Gaza Strip. South Africa has asked the court to order the cessation of military operations by Israel in its previous request. The court has not done so. The court is well aware that to do so would mean that 132 hostages would remain to languish in Hamas's tunnels forsaken. It would mean that Hamas would be left unhindered and free to continue its attacks against Israeli territory and Israeli civilians, which it has a stated intention to do. It would turn the Genocide Convention into a sword rather than a shield, and would strip Israel of its rights under international law and the Israeli civilians of its protection. Such a situation is both legally and morally untenable. For all of the reasons given in response to South Africa's earlier requests for similar provisional measures, the court rightfully rejected South Africa's previous request, and it would be wholly inappropriate to grant a provisional measure in such terms. The second of the provisional measures requested by South Africa repeats earlier requests it has made, either sufficiently covered by the various provisional measures ordered by the court or rejected in previous rounds. South Africa has not given sufficient reason why the court should now deviate from or essentially duplicate its earlier decisions. The third provisional measure requested by South Africa would require that Israel submit an open report to the court on all measures taken to give effect to these and previous provisional measures. As I have said, Israel has engaged fully and sincerely in these proceedings, despite the outrageous and libelous claims that have been leveled against it. It has submitted to the court 2 detailed reports that has been forthcoming about the efforts it is undertaking, as well as the challenges it is dealing with to alleviate the humanitarian situation in Gaza. It has made clear time and again its unwavering commitment to its obligations under international law. It has done this while the fighting continues and the citizens are still under attack. South Africa has responded with a barrage of requests. It has clearly adopted a strategy of dragging Israel to court endlessly, regardless of any legal undertakings by Israel. In these circumstances, ordering Israel to submit another report is unwarranted. Mr. President, that concludes my statement. I ask that you now invite Ms. Kaplan-Turgeman to the podium.
I thank the co-agent of Israel and ask Ms. Tamar Kaplan-Turgeman to take the floor. You have the floor, Madam.
Mr. President, members of the court, it is an honor to appear before you on behalf of the State of Israel. As you have just heard, Israel is still under attack. We are still counting more and more of our dead and attending 2,000 more who are wounded. No less than 132 children, women, and men are still held hostage in unimaginable conditions by Hamas and other Palestinian militants in Gaza. Tens of thousands of Israeli citizens are internally displaced. Most of them have not seen their homes in over 7 months. Many have no homes to return to. The very grave effect of the horrific massacre of 7 October continue to ripple through our people and communities, who must not be forgotten. They too are worthy of international law's protection. Mr. President, members of the court, I draw particular attention to the women still held hostage in Gaza. Ms. Amit Sosna, who was held captive in Gaza by Hamas for 55 days, testified recently that she was physically abused, beaten up, and chained to a bed, threatened at gunpoint, and forced to perform sexual acts on her captor. Hamas refuses to release these women and all the other hostages it holds. It brazenly refuses to alleviate the humanitarian suffering that this war has brought to all concerned on both sides. It has turned down numerous proposals for a ceasefire, and it continues to favor death and destruction as a strategy. We heard nothing about that yesterday. In fact, while South Africa made many outrageous, false statements yesterday, perhaps most striking was what it did not say. We have hardly heard the word Hamas, even though it is Hamas that has brought about all the suffering and pain that we are witnessing, the suffering of Israelis and Palestinians alike. Instead, we sat here and listened to venomous accusations, to language that is so hateful, so out of touch with reality, that it was difficult to believe we are in a court of law. Mr. President, members of the court, there is no doubt that this war is tragic and has caused great suffering on both sides. Again, this is Hamas's doing. South Africa provides an account that is not only incredibly partial, it is also distorted. But to apply the law properly, to impart justice, surely the facts must matter. These facts cannot but show that Israel is seeking consistently to abide by the law in the excruciating circumstances of warfare that Hamas has deliberately created. The blatant misrepresentation we heard yesterday cannot alter that. For a start, South Africa claims that Israel has shut down the two main land crossings through which aid enters into Gaza, this being the Rafah and Kerem Shalom crossings, and that Israel has cut Gaza off from all humanitarian, medical, and other supplies. This is patently untrue. The truth is that Israel allows and facilitates, as it has been for months, the provision of more and more humanitarian aid to the civilian population throughout the Gaza Strip. It does so through a number of crossings on a daily basis. I refer the court to the map that is now on the screen before you, and also at tab 5 of your folders. Contrary to South Africa's claim, the Kerem Shalom crossing has been in continuous operation since December 2023, with one recent exception between the 5th and 8th of May, when it was closed after Hamas fired at Kerem Shalom. Even though Hamas fire continued on 8, 10, 11, 12 May, and several times even yesterday, the crossing remained open, allowing more and more aid to flow in. This crossing has been the central entry point for aid for months. I know that South Africa has not only wrongly alleged that the Kerem Shalom crossing has been shut down, it also requested that Israel relinquish control over it. I hardly need to say much about this request, given that Kerem Shalom is situated on sovereign Israeli territory. As for the Rafah crossing, to say that Israel closed this crossing is inaccurate at best. Its operation was disrupted on May 6, and since then, Israel has taken active measures and has been in intensive discussions with Egypt, supported by other international actors, in an effort to resume the flow of aid. In the meantime, and in keeping with its consistent efforts, Israel has taken immediate measures to ensure that alternative paths are available for the continued increase in its provision of humanitarian assistance to the Gaza Strip. In this context, the Prime Minister of Israel convened 2 high-level meetings to ensure continued adequate response to the humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip. The Prime Minister instructed the relevant authorities in Israel to take immediate interim steps to enable increased flow of aid to Gaza Strip through other routes and sources. South Africa neglected to mention yesterday that the total amount of aid entering Gaza in the last few days is now once again increasing significantly. Indeed, on 12 May, a new land crossing was opened at Erez West. It joins yet another new land crossing, fully operationalized, on May 1st at Erez East, which together allow for the entry into Gaza of additional 200 trucks per day after their inspection elsewhere. An additional land route bringing aid into Gaza since March 2024, which again is fully operational, is Gate 96. This land route brings aid directly into northern Gaza, thus reducing the risk of looting of aid convoys that otherwise make their way to the area from the southern part of the Strip. For this purpose, Israel allows Palestinian truck drivers from Gaza to enter Israeli territory following security checks in order to collect and upload humanitarian supplies. Israel has done a great deal to expand the capacity of land crossings, including by extending the working hours there. It has also expanded infrastructure and roads supporting the operations of the crossing. The Israeli government allocated approximately $52 million United States dollars to the implementation of such efforts. We heard nothing about all of that yesterday. Aerial routes remain in operation so as to allow for direct parachuting of aid into Gaza. Such operations are undertaken almost daily, involving a significant number of states. Many thousands of aid packages were provided in this way by dozens of operations in recent weeks. The temporary floating pier off the Gaza coast, whose construction began following President Biden's declaration on 7 March 2024, begins operating today. It is expected to enable the delivery of approximately 2.2 million food portions per day by the World Food Programme. I should add that this location too came under Hamas fire last month while construction was underway. Further progress in relation to maritime routes was achieved last week when Israel and Cyprus adopted on 8 May technical arrangements which aim to facilitate the implementation of the Cyprus Maritime Corridor, about which Israel has previously informed this court. This corridor was already utilized even prior to the concluding of the arrangements, but they will further improve its operation. Is this what a hermetic closure looks like? Mr. President, members of the court, it is not difficult to see that Israel has been making extensive efforts over the recent months, together with various international partners, to increase the provision of humanitarian assistance throughout the Gaza Strip. There have been remarkable achievements. South Africa's complete disregard of this reality and this truth is as telling as it is alarming. Israel's extensive and ongoing actions have been detailed in the reports submitted by Israel to the court, most recently on 28 April. They have brought about a significant increase in the amount of humanitarian aid that had entered into Gaza. They are consistent with the decision adopted on 4 April by Israel Ministerial Committee on National Security Affairs, headed by the Prime Minister of Israel, and I quote, to increase the efforts to allow and facilitate the transfer of humanitarian aid for the civilian population in the Gaza Strip, end of quote, and to establish a ministerial team to, and I quote, implement the policy of the cabinet regarding the transfer of humanitarian aid to the Gaza Strip, end of quote. The decision records that these steps are undertaken further to the recommendations of security and foreign affairs officials concerning the need to continue the provisions of humanitarian aid to the civilian population in the Gaza Strip. All of these steps have had a significant impact in alleviating the humanitarian situation and avoiding the catastrophes which South Africa threatened were imminent in December, then January, then February, then March, and then April. While the situation is constantly changing, Israel is adapting and continues to work to improve the humanitarian situation and to prevent harm to civilians and to aid workers. I note that, as Mr. Noam has said, Israel's actions in this context are currently under the judicial review of Israel Supreme Court. These steps have been repeatedly accompanied by clear statements from Israel leadership. For example, Israel's Prime Minister Netanyahu said on 15 May that, and I quote, our policy from the start, from the beginning of the war, my policy was, you have to provide the basic humanitarian aid that is required by international law. But in the last 6 weeks, we actually changed it, not only to providing basic humanitarian aid, but flooding Gaza with humanitarian aid, end of quote. Israel's Defense Minister, Gallant, likewise said on May 1st that, and I quote, we are taking significant measures in order to increase the volume of humanitarian aid into Gaza. This is essential, end of quote. He added that, and I quote once more, we are fighting Hamas, a brutal terrorist organization. We are not fighting the civilian in Gaza, and we will facilitate the delivery of humanitarian aid, end of quote. In order to show a genocidal intent that simply is not there, South Africa continues to distort other statements. In quoting the Prime Minister as stating that Gaza must not constitute a threat to Israel, they omit to mention that he was expressly speaking about Hamas and returning the hostages it took. when quoting the Minister of Defense as saying that the military operates neighborhood by neighborhood and will reach every location in Gaza, they neglected to say that he too referred expressly to Hamas. In the same statement, he also made plain that the humanitarian issue is a central one. While South Africa turns a blind eye to Israel's remarkable efforts, they have not gone unnoticed by others. The UN Senior Humanitarian Coordinator, who was appointed following Security Council Resolution 2720, said on 24 April in a briefing to the UN Security Council that Israel has taken a number of steps to improve aid delivery. When asked about her contacts with the Israeli side, she said that there is a very constructive cooperation with her mission. Senior government officials of various states likewise said they saw real and demonstrable progress in the delivery of aid. To say, as South Africa presently does, that Israel is deliberately denying humanitarian aid cannot be farther from the truth. On the contrary, Israeli actions undertaken in accordance with orders from Israel's highest levels of government show exactly the opposite. Only yesterday, no less than 365 trucks carrying humanitarian supplies entered into Gaza through the various land crossings. More than 330 of the trucks entered through Kerem Shalom, the same crossing that South Africa said yesterday was shut down. Other allegations about South Africa fare no better. Contrary to South Africa allegations, thousands of international aid workers have been entering and exiting Gaza. Deconfliction mechanisms were reviewed and improved following highly unfortunate incidents in order to guarantee that their safety is always maintained. These lessons learned, too, have been detailed in Israel's recent report to the court. Fuel continues to be delivered to Gaza, including this past Wednesday, when 76,000 liters were transferred to the World Food Programme. Times do not permit setting the record straight with regard to all of South Africa's outrageous misrepresentations. But the claim that Israel deliberately hampering medical services in Gaza, or that Rafah is the last viable location for medical care, cannot be left unanswered. Israel persistently continues to facilitate the enhancement of medical services throughout the entire Gaza Strip. In addition to the hospitals located in Rafah, efforts have been extended to support the rehabilitation of hospitals elsewhere in the territory. This may be seen at tab 6 of your folders. In fact, 14 hospitals are in operation outside Rafah. 8 field hospitals are in full operation, with only 2 of them located in Rafah. A field hospital, which was established by the ICRC in the Al-Muasi area, began operating as recently as 9 May. 1 more field hospital is due to open later this month, and the establishment of 4 more field hospitals is currently under consideration. Mobile clinics continue to operate in the Al-Muasi area too. Collaboration with a host of international actors, including the World Health Organization, continues in order to strengthen and expand medical care all over. South Africa would do well to tell its ally, Hamas, to stop exploiting hospitals and other protected sites as military command centers. And since we heard grave misrepresentation yesterday about the Shifa hospital, it must be made clear that even during very intense fighting in the Shifa hospital, after Hamas reinstated the hospital compound as a military hub, the IDF took proactive steps aid to ensure continuous medical care to patients hospitalized there. Despite the intense military activity on the premises, no patients or medical staff were harmed during the operation by the IDF. On 22nd March 2024, the IDF brought into the hospital, in the course of its operational activity, trucks carrying medical equipment, food and water, including over 10,000 units of medicine, hundreds of painkiller packages, over 100 packages of bandage and IVs, and dozens of advanced medical monitoring devices. Contrary to the impression that South Africa sought to leave you with, the IDF Chief of Staff said to the forces on that location that, and I quote, "We do everything not to harm patients, not to harm medical staff. In this operation, not one medical staff was harmed, no patients were harmed, and many terrorists were killed and captured," end of quote. He said that the hospital is not a safe place, not safe for terrorists. South Africa even saw fit to present to the court a false translation in its attempt to create intent. The soldiers in the video shown yesterday were not saying to destroy, but to dismantle Rafah, a clear reference to Hamas capabilities. South Africa ignores any such statements that show Israel's true intention. It had to distort the facts to sustain its label of genocide in such repugnant terms as final stages and extermination zones. Israel continues to take extraordinary measures in order to minimize harm to Palestinian civilians in Gaza. These have been described at length to the court in the previous hearing and in our written submission, and ignored to the same extent by South Africa. Time permits only several examples, one of which is that Israel has sent over 15 million text messages informing civilians of planned IDF activity in specific areas so that they can avoid them. It has made over 18 million pre-recorded phone calls and an additional 100,000 individual phone calls alerting individuals of danger in their vicinity. Over 9 million leaflets dropped over specific areas have provided civilians with information as to where humanitarian aid may be accessed and how to leave zone of combat. Once again, is this how a military set on total or partial destruction of people operates? It is also the Israeli military that has put in place clear and definite procedure for targeting. This requires, inter alia, selection of munitions that would achieve the military need while minimizing civilian harm, and the conduct for each and every strike of a proportionality assessment in accordance with international humanitarian law. The IDF, moreover, marks sensitive sites, such as the medical service and shelters, on military operational systems, and takes additional measures to ensure that IDF forces are aware of them. All this likewise applies in operations in Rafah, as may be seen at tab 7 of your folders. While fighting to defend Israel, it is also engaged in ensuring that humanitarian aid continues to flow in. South Africa speaks of extermination zones, but the source cited in its request in support of these allegations does not say this, let alone prove it. It does reference express statement from the IDF Chief of Staff that civilians in combat areas must not be killed. An official statement by the IDF that the IDF does not define areas where anyone present could be shot, and a discussion of the IDF review of exceptional incidents where there are allegations of violation of this rule. Equally unsettling is South Africa's false allegation that the IDF uses artificial intelligence that decides who to attack, a claim the origin of which is one press report that relies on anonymous sources. Unfortunately, South Africa did not tell the court yesterday of Israel's official response to the report, which states clearly that the claims are simply not true. South Africa's claims regarding IDF attack procedures are also false. Mr. President, members of the court, if South Africa seeks to point to any change in the situation since your order of 26 March, it should have acknowledged all these remarkable humanitarian efforts by Israel. It should also have recognized the crimes committed constantly by Hamas and the circumstances that compel Israel to respond to them, as any state would. Instead, it offers grandstanding and rhetoric, no real evidence. That's just a transparent attempt to relitigate the same matter one more time and to extract more and more from this procedure. Mr. President, members of the court, even if South Africa could establish a relevant change in the circumstances, which it has not done, it has not established any change in the situation that would justify the extreme measure that is now seeking. The measures currently in place are entirely sufficient and no further ones are needed. As Mr. Noam explained, South Africa is trying once more to drag this court down a very dangerous path. It will have you say that a sovereign state that is under a persistent attack, whose citizens are held hostage in brutal conditions, cannot defend itself or its citizens. As you have consistently made clear, there is no international law to this effect. Indeed, it is inconceivable that there would be. Mr. President, members of the court, we must be very clear. Acceding to South Africa's request would be an affront to the very idea of the protection afforded by the law. For the court to accede to South Africa's request is to enable Hamas's battalion to continue to target Israel, to attack humanitarian crossing, and to destine the Palestinians in Gaza to perpetual war. Is to enable Hamas to reconstitute its forces in order to commit the 7 October atrocities again and again, as they have vowed to do. It is to condemn the hostages to near certain death. What would it mean for the women still held in captivity? Granting South Africa's request would be to side with a terrorist organization, which will no doubt celebrate any such decision. It is to legitimize, protect, and reward Hamas's despicable method of warfare, to enable its heinous crimes to persist, with all the consequences that might follow. Mr. President, members of the Court, it is one thing to require that Israel abide by its international legal obligations and protect civilians when exercising its inherent right to defend itself. But to deny Israel that inherent right is a different thing altogether. It is unthinkable. Can it really be maintained that if hostages are brutally held captive in Rafah, Israel cannot come to their rescue? Can it really be maintained that if Hamas continues to use Gaza as a launching pad for its indiscriminate attack, Israel cannot defend itself against them? We respectfully submit that international law offers a clear answer to these questions. Mr. President, members of the Court, on this basis and in accordance with Article 60, Paragraph 2 of the Rules of Court, I now proceed to read Israel's final submission. The State of Israel requests the Court to reject the request for the modification and indication of provisional measures submitted by the Republic of South Africa.
Liars! Liars!
That concludes Israel's presentation. Thank you.
Okay, I thank the co-agent of Israel, Ms. Tamar Kaplan-Turjuman. Before the end of this set of hearings, I would like to give the floor to Judge Nolte, who wishes to put a question to Israel. Judge Nolte, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. My question is, can Israel provide information about the existing humanitarian conditions in the designated evacuation zones, in particular Al-Mawasi, and how it would ensure safe passage to these zones, as well as the provision of shelter, food, water, and other humanitarian aid and assistance to all evacuees that are and can be expected to arrive in these zones. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank Judge Nolte. The written text of this question will be communicated to the parties as soon as possible. Israel is invited to provide its written reply to the question no later than tomorrow, Saturday, May 18, 2024 at 6 p.m. Furthermore, any comments South Africa may wish to make in accordance with Article 72 of the Rules of Court on the response by Israel must be submitted no later than Monday, May 20, 2024 at noon. This brings to an end the oral proceedings on the applicant's request for the indication of additional provisional measures and the modification of previous provisional measures in the case concerning application of the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide in the Gaza Strip, South Africa versus Israel. It remains for me to thank the agents, counsel, and advocates of the applicant and the respondent for their statements in the course of these hearings. In accordance with usual practice, I would ask the agents to remain at the court's disposal to provide any additional information the court may require. The court will render its order on the request for the indication and modification of provisional measures as soon as possible. The parties will be advised in due course as to the date on which the court will deliver its order at a public sitting. Since the court has no other business before it today, the sitting is declared closed.
Maar wie dan? Iemand van de Zuid-Afrikaanse...
Nou, er zitten heel wat mensen binnen.
Is het gewoon geschreeuwd?
zie hem niet live op Reuters. still waiting for violating commandant, so I'll let you know.
South Africa. I'm talking about 10 to 15 minutes. Let's just hit South Africa.
Abi aynısı hemen. Abi gelmeden nereden bileceğiz? Bir şeyin aynısı. İsrail'le yapmayacak. İsrail'le yapmıyor. Gene gel. Gene şey gelin.
Sorry? Outside? Yes.
Did you see who is she? Did you find her?
The lady?
Yeah.
Was, I don't know. I think it's a big deal.
Yes.
Hmm?
Go.
Good morning. In 5 minutes you get first the delegation of South Africa and afterwards Israel will come. Both. First Africa and then Israel.
Come on, it's too small.
Like this? Yeah. Wait. This is like Sergei Bubka.
Just make sure not to go in front of the faces. Just make sure not to go in front of the faces.
Usually must be like this.
Come closer, yeah, because otherwise they'll stand on the stairs.
Yeah. Je descends un peu. Oui. Elle a été, on l'a vu par la série. J'avais pas vu, donc je ne savais pas. Monteur.
الو يا خالد جنوبي لا اسرائيل
That's a bold claim. On jeans like that. Okay.
Yeah, it's actually a risk of play. It really is. That's good. Unexpected turn of events.
Yeah.
It's just us today.
Could you come
Yes, we'll come as close as possible.
And one more if you can.
One more?
One more.
Yeah, thank you.
Is that fine? So, to introduce ourselves, again, I'm Zain Dango. I'm the Director General of the Department of International Relations Corporation of South Africa, which is essentially Foreign Affairs. Mr. Amari Jazi from the Palestinian Authority, also from the Foreign Affairs Division. We just have a few points to make, given the response by Israel to our own pleadings yesterday. I think the first thing we want to say, just in terms of the tenure and the nature of it in general, and I want to get to some specifics, and Amar can add in, is that what we heard today was not really an engagement on the facts, some engagement on the facts, but not really rebutting what South Africa is trying to assert, is essentially trying to detract and blame, cast political aspersions on the intentions of South Africa. And what we are hoping for is that the judges will actually look at the strength of our own pleadings, not only now, but also in terms of our responses to Israel's written reports as required by the courts. Because we do believe that our own intention here has really been to bring to the fore key concerns around international crimes, in particularly the crimes of crimes, which is genocide in this case. And we are very serious about that from a human rights perspective. And not essentially here as alleged by Israel that we are here to defend or protect Hamas from destruction. And I think that if one looks at the evidence base that's been brought to not just this court but to all of us through the various means available before journalists when disallowed, is the evidence of the massive destruction of people, their lives, but also, domicide is a new term emerging, the destruction of homes, hospitals, schools, universities, all the means necessary for a group to sustain life, which is essentially at the core of the Genocide Convention. Some of the specificities, when we made our first application in December, and we followed that up with our oral pleadings, we were very clear in how we looked at October 7th. We were very clear in our application that while we recognize under the Geneva Conventions, especially Protocol 1 of the 1977 Geneva Convention, that oppressed people have the right to use force. They cannot target civilians. Targeting of civilians is a war crime. And it's for that reason, shortly after October 7th, we approached the International Criminal Court to ask for both Hamas and those involved in the armed attacks to be investigated for war crimes under that Geneva Convention Protocol 1, but also in terms of the Rome Statute. We also asked for, of course, for Israel to be investigated for war crimes. And in the case of Israel, also because of genocide, because of the unfolding genocide. So to argue that we are here again, as they did in January on behest of Hamas, is completely false. They then refer to a conference that took place in South Africa. It was a civil society conference. That civil society conference expressly invited civil society people that had nothing to do with government. And it included civil society formations from Palestine, including from the Palestinian Authority, where there's a section dealing with anti-apartheid and an anti-apartheid conference. So to suggest, as they did, that this was a government hosting of Hamas is completely false. And we just needed to clearly rebut that. I want to go back to the Geneva Protocols and just to put the context for how South Africa approaches this. South Africa has got a liberation movement, not government, that signed the Geneva Protocol of 1977. In 1948, with that liberation movement is subsequently become the majority governing party. And in 1948, they voluntarily signed to adhere to all the prescripts of that Geneva Convention that they will not target civilians. That is something that has crept into how government approaches these things. So we are signatories to the Geneva Conventions. I must point out that Israel is not a signatory to that very same Geneva Convention. They've recognized that they may have some obligations under international customary law, but essentially they are not adherents to the Geneva Conventions that we hope that now that they are mentioning it will find themselves bound to it, given that international customary law is binding too. And important, Article 75 of that convention prohibits expressly as a war crime collective punishment. It prohibits expressly as a war crime torture. And we've seen that happening in the current context. So if they want to point out to the war crimes perpetrated by Hamas, then clearly they must see that what they're doing is a war crime. And it's more serious in their case because they are a state and bound by various obligations as a state, even if they are not a party to the Geneva Conventions, particularly Protocol 1 and Protocol 2 of 77. So I wanted to clarify that, and hopefully the other issue that I think we need to touch on is the unconditional release of hostages. On the steps here, our Minister of Foreign Affairs, when the court made the judgment in January, expressly agreed and stated that the hostages must be released unconditionally. We have made that expressly clear in various statements as well, because we recognize, in terms of that very same Geneva Convention 75 that we hold dearly, that hostage-taking breaches the Geneva Convention. But that also then includes the unlawful detention of Palestinians without trial, thousands of them, which is tantamount to hostage-taking. So we call for that, for Palestinians who are arrested without, essentially what we call detention without trial, that it's essentially tantamount to hostage-taking in the current context. So we hope that this will be something that will be factored in as well. With regards to the attack on the data, on the fatalities, the use of OCHA in this report reflects similar incorrect interpretations of what OCHA is saying. OCHA has released a statement that it says that it's not reducing its numbers. It's essentially just trying to verify in a close as possible a way the actual people that's been killed. They are not revising their numbers down. What they're saying is the numbers remain the same, and that until the verification is complete, that their statistics remain. I think the best thing for the court to do and for the media to do is to interview OCHA directly on this. OCHA has released a statement on this. I'm not going to go through OCHA's statement. OCHA can speak for themselves. But attack on UN and UN figures, I mean numbers, not the individuals. There's also been attack on individuals in the UN, undermines international law in a way that seeks to discredit the information base that this court and other bodies use, both as to collect evidence but also to hold Israel account. So I wanted to clarify all of these issues from our perspective. Amar?
Yes, thank you. Well, let me say the following. I think what we heard today is a delusional presentation and a parallel reality that is contrary to everything that the international community, the relevant institutions, the numbers of humanitarian workers who were killed, the number of journalists, the live stream of this genocide, which you have all seen. Israel wants us to disbelieve what everybody is seeing lively, including in relation to humanitarian aid and everything. This, what have been represented today and presented before the court today, is contrary to what international organizations and relevant bodies who are working on the ground and denied to take actions related to relieving the suffering of the people on the ground are saying, contrary to what Israel is saying today. Israel today tried to draw a parallel reality which does not exist, and I think it is exposed in the sense that every international and relevant body have spoken against such claims. What I want to say is also what we have seen in relation to the aid convoys. It's not about numbers, but the reality is about the attacks on these aid convoys. And journalists have reported from the ground the attacks on the civilians when they were trying to reach these aid convoys. It's about also what we are seeing today in the West Bank, the streets of the West Bank, where settlers are destroying all the aid that is coming in through Jordan to Gaza, and under the eyes and the watch of the Israeli soldiers. These are the realities that Israel wants us to unsee and to paint a picture where civilians in Gaza are living a rosy life, almost the way they pictured it, including in relation to hospitals and everything else. So I think you have reported, and the reports are out there, whether it is from the journalists, which Israel has killed more than 100 of them, whether it is the aid workers, which Israel has killed hundreds of them, whether it is the civilians and the numbers which they try to discount and to paint that Palestinians are suicidal. You know, they are telling us to leave that area because it's getting bombarded, but we decided to die in these areas and to kill our children with ourselves. Basically, again, dehumanizing Palestinians and picturing us in a way that we like to die and we like destruction. Again, I think the question that also the German judge has requested is an extremely important question, because this is the bottom line in which Israel has been asking civilians in hundreds of thousands and in millions to move from one place to another over one day or another, and attacking the routes that it draws to them, and asking them to move to barren areas where there is no services and no aid whatsoever. So we'll look forward to see what Israel will respond. And of course, the facts speak for themselves, including UN reports, which has been attacked and constantly attacked. We are, happy that finally Israel decided to quote OCHA, because OCHA a few days ago was for Israel a villain that is only parroting, including by the terms of what Israel was saying inside the court, parroting Hamas's number, which is untrue and inaccurate, because these are verified numbers and everybody knows that they are verified. One last example of the amount of parallel reality that we heard today in the court is what Israel is doing in relation to the only body, UNRWA, which is responsible for disseminating of aid. Israel refuses to allow UNRWA to act. Israel attacks UNRWA and UN places of aid and gathering where people are gathering. And this is the reality. They have said it in front of everyone. They have attacked the Secretary General of the United Nations, which they refuse his facts and his realities, in which he said, contrary to everything that we heard inside. We can go on and on. We don't want to hold you forever, but what we heard is a pure fantasy today in the court. And I think facts and the reports of courageous journalists on the ground, including aid workers and relevant international bodies, is what matters, and this is what South Africa relied on in its submission.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Just as much as we wouldn't like to keep you here forever, we hope you can return the favor. Please do ask 2 questions maximum, and introduce the media house you're coming from and state your questions. Raise your hand and I will point at you.
Thank you very much, Abdullah Imasi from Al Arabi TV. My first question is that Israel tell ICG that South Africa case makes a mockery of genocide. What is your reaction on that? And also, what do you expect to do ICG ruling to be? Are you optimistic? Thank you.
So I think the first thing is the Genocide Convention is very clear on what constitutes the crime of genocide. It's a suppression crime. The same provisions are found in the Rome Statute. And in terms of how we approach the court, we're following the law to the letter. Genocide turns on intent. We looked at intent coming from Israeli senior officials. We first raised that in our application in January. We repeated that in our oral arguments in January. We repeated some of that yesterday. We didn't have the time to go into detail. When the merit stage emerges, we'll be able to put a fuller account of intent. Intent is at the heart of genocide. And we feel that we have a very strong case. And we feel that even in this provisional measures stage where we don't necessarily have to prove intent at this stage, we've put enough evidence before the court on the genocidal intent coming from Israeli leaders. So we are not making a mockery of the Genocide Convention. Nobody is exempt from international law. There's no special exemption for any state from any provision in international law. The Genocide Convention does not exempt the Israeli state from genocidal actions. And to argue that is to argue for exceptionalism. And we believe that exceptionalism has given rise to the kinds of impunity that we see Israel behaving with. If you heard the opening statements from my colleague here, that institutional impunity has been there for 7 decades. Disregard for international law, disregard for binding resolutions of the Security Council over many, many years. Most recently, the binding resolution that called for a ceasefire for the month of Ramadan, and the provisional orders which are binding. So we are not making a mockery of international law. We are trying to use it to the best of its extent. It is Israel that actually has to be held accountable for not complying. So in terms of what we hope from the court, we can only hope that we've put the evidence base in front of them for them to make the best decision possible.
Thank you very much. Sir?
Carlos Dada from El Faro, El Salvador. You have specifically asked the court to order a ceasefire while Israeli troops are mounting around Rafah. What I mean is there's some kind of urgency in your request. I wanted to know if you explicitly asked for a date for a response for it to make sense.
So we have not explicitly asked for a date. We've expressed urgency, given the fact that you've just outlined, and the fact that even as we speak, attacks continue, that we've seen that immediately after our application was launched, attack moved from Rafah to, again, the north of Gaza. So we hope that the court will make a decision urgently, and judging by the manner in which they're engaging with us, I do think they will give us a rather speedy response, maybe perhaps early next week.
Any more questions?
One last one.
Yes, sir.
Bart Biesemans from Reuters.
Which media house?
Reuters.
Reuters.
So there was an incident inside and the live was cut. Could you tell us what happened and what your reaction to it was?
There was I think one of the people in the gallery, we're not sure who. It's a public gallery, and basically just shouting out in protest, essentially, yeah. And that person was then escorted out. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thanks.
All right.
Yeah.
هو كانت مرافعة اعتبار قالت ماذا
This is this one, yeah. Yeah, just a little number. Oh, thank you.
No, Israel.
Yeah, I have where you are from. Thank you.
Ici, il vient. Il vient.
Güvenlik var. O geldiğinin arkasına o geldi. Bence onlar da senin düşündüğün, yani o güvenlik yanlış bir şey söyledi. Biz bir tek sorduk, teyit ettirdik.
J'ai lancé mon mail pour demander de l'aide là pour
C'est the duty top.
On va voir.
Yes?
Okay. Israel left while he was talking.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, I saw him get in the car. Same thing. Yeah.
Donc il parle pas israélien.
You saw the Israeli?
Yeah, it was right when he was making his...
Israel is already gone.
Okay.
So it is finished. No Israel. Otherwise we're standing here still for half an hour and we're waiting.
It's Bart from the
Every time.
Everything is turning around. It's over outside.